Hello everyone. So in this video, I'll go through the in-class example on aggregate planning for service sector. I will start with question 1 and I will demonstrate here again how to do the trade-off analysis, because there were some questions. Then, as I already said in class, that give it a go for question number 2. Then you can look at the video and look at the standard solution that's being posted in order to compare your response. For question 1, we want to show that the hiring and using a full-time temporary worker is cheaper than hiring 2 half-time students, and this is cheaper than using 2 permanent workers during overtime for each workday, right? So I have marked here to start with the 3 options we have available. So option 1, hiring and using a full-time temporary worker. So let's get the cost for option 1. So each FTE employee receives $3,000 a month, right? So that's going to be my cost for wages, $3,000 per month for the temporary worker. And then we have a estimated cost of $300 on average, which is charged on during the first month of employment, right? So which is kind of a hiring cost, which includes training and so on, right? So that's $300. So that gives me a total of $3,300. On the other hand, we have option 2, using 2 half-time students, right? So remember, when you're using half-time, which means 0.5 FTE, as we're using 2 half-times, that is going to give me 1 full-time equivalent. So which means my wages will remain same, right? So for the 1 full-time equivalent, either you're temporary or permanent, we are paying $3,000. So that's what's being said here. So each FTE receives $3,000 per month, and each half-time student receives $1,500 per month. So either way is fine. You can do here 2 multiplied by 1,500 and so on, right? So at the same time, the estimated cost for a FTE is $300, right? For the training, right? So if you go by head count, you need to train 2 students, right? So I'm going to 2 students will be required to train in order to get 1 FTE, right? So that's going to cost me $300 per head count, and we have 2 here, so that's going to come around $3,600, right? So from here we can say that hiring a full-time temporary worker is cheaper than hiring 2 half-time students, right? Because the training cost is increased. Now you're hiring 2 individuals and both needs to be trained. Okay, so now let's look at option 3. So we have using 2 permanent workers during overtime. So before we go to this option, let's explore it a little bit, because there was some confusion around this area. So let's say I have a worker, let's say worker named W1. He starts his shift 8 a.m. in the morning. So from 8 to 4 p.m. he is on the regular time, and when he's doing the regular time, the permanent employee receives $3,000 a month. It's representing 8-hour shift, right? And it is given here that each FTE of overtime receives $4,500 a month, right? So 1 FTE during overtime is receiving $4,500. So let's consider this worker. Let's say the worker 1, W1, agrees to go on the overtime, and he is going to do 4 hours on a given day. Why 4 hours? Because we are extending our shift from 8 to 12 hours. So he's doing regular time for first 8 hours, and the next 4 hours he's doing the overtime, right? The worker W1. So he starts at 4 p.m. his overtime, and it goes up to 8 p.m. So taking this in consideration, when the 1 FTE representing 8 hours, so the next 4 hours are going to represent 0.5 FTE, right? During the overtime period. So what will happen when you have 0.5 FTE during the overtime? If there's a full FTE during overtime, we'll pay $4,500. But with 0.5 FTE, we will pay $4,500 over 2. So once you do that, 4,500 divided by 2. So the cost from here for the half-time FTE would be $2,250, right? If we put this in equation, let's say this worker was working for the entire month as regular time, we're going to pay him $3,000 here, and plus we will pay him $2,250 for the overtime, right? Why? Because he's representing half FTE. So as it is given in option 3, using 2 permanent workers during overtime. So I'm going to use 2 permanent workers during overtime, but every day only 0.5 FTE is available, right? Because this is the only time when you're doing the overtime, just for 4 hours shift, right? So if you're employing 2 workers, so each worker is doing 4 hours shift, it is going to give me 1 FTE. So which means 22,250 multiplied by 2, so which is going to come across $4,500 a month. So that's why for option 3 we end up having $4,500 per month as the overtime cost, right? So call here 4,500. We have 2 workers who are working from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. so which is 4 hours only. That is representing 0.5 FTE. So that will give me 1 full-time equivalent, which means 2 workers doing 4 hours is going to give me 8 hours in total, right? So that's why this cost is $4,500. So I hope that this makes sense. If you still have questions, you can always reach me out. Let's look into question number 2 from here. So when you do aggregate planning for any scenario, either manufacturing or service, we always start with the forecast by knowing the demand, right? So in this case, the demand is given. So demand is given here. So the full-time equivalent employee requirements. So your demand is given as FTE, employee requirements, right? Okay, so let's put this in. So for the month of October, the demand is 4,000. For November is 6,000. And for December is 7,100 FTE, right? So once you know the demand, then you can start looking into available capacity. We know that we need to start with the permanent workforce. So I have lands and employees 4,000 FTE employees throughout the year, right? Okay, so we're 3,500 full-time and 1,000 half-time. So again, if you interpret this information, we have 3,500 full-time employees. So 3,500 full-time equivalent. Then I have 1,000 which are 0.5 FTE. So from here I got 500, right? So in total I have 4,000 full-time equivalent, right? Don't use 4,500 because these employees, 1,000 employees are only employed as part-time workers, right? Or employed as 0.5 FTE, right? So let's put this information in. So we have 4,000 here as permanent workforce, which is going to stay with us throughout the year. Then we can look into the full-time temporary workers. So why we want to look into the full-time temporary workers next? Because that's kind of a cheaper option, right? Instead of having 2 half-time students and doing overtime, right? However, within this scenario, you're given with a constraint. So you can employ 1,000 additional full-time temporary workers, right? So that's where your constraint is given. So my full-time temporary workers should be either 1,000 or less than that, right? Do we need to employ anybody in October? The answer to that is no, because the demand is already satisfied, right? So there's a match between demand and capacity. So I'm going to put that 0. Then for the month of November, we are still short of capacity here because I have 4,000 FTE employees and the forecast is 6,000 FTE. So I'm short by 2,000, right? And how many I can employ? 1,000 temporary workers, right? Okay, so similarly, I'm short of capacity here, right, by 3,100 units because demand is 7,100 and the capacity is 4,000 in terms of permanent workforce. So we can have 1,000 temporary full-time workers here. Okay, so still we are short of capacity for November and December, right? So which means we need to explore the other options too. So I don't need any student during October, right? However, we can look into the option for November, right? So as we said, up to 1,000 half-time school students can be employed, right? So that's why when you look at constraint here, everything is represented in full-time equivalent. So if I say 1,000 half-time students, means you will have 500 full-time equivalent, right? So that's why it is 500 here, not 1,000, because we're representing everything in FTE, right? So that is going to 500 here, and same we can do here. So once you do that, so you can again look at the calculations. Here we have 4,000, 5,000 and 5,500 as capacity, right? Using permanent and temporary workforce. But our demand is of 6,000. So we're still short of capacity. And again here, we are short of capacity too, right? Just one correction, guys. This is not 6,000, this is 6,600, right? Okay, so I just noticed that. But anyway, even if this is 6,600, we're still short of capacity, right? So the next option is you can look into the overtime using permanent workers. Again, remember how many permanent FTE we have? 4,000, right? So 4,000 FTE, and you can do only 4-hour overtime per worker, right? So that gives you 0.5 FTE during the overtime, right? So that's why you have this constraint as less than or equal to 2,000. So once you multiply these two during overtime, your capacity is 2,000 FTE, right? Okay, so always remember that to convert everything into full-time equivalent. If you put 4,000 here, that will be representing half time, right? Or 0.5 FTE, but we are considering everything as 1 FTE, right? Okay, so from here we have this. We don't need to have any overtime, that's fine, that's 0, but we are still short of capacity by 1,100 FTE. So yes, that's all good. We have 2,000 available. We can ask some of our workers to do the overtime. So that is 1,100. So now we have exact match here, right? So the overall capacity with all of these components is 6,600. That's what we require, right? Similarly, for the month of December, we will have 1,600 workers or 1,600 FTE doing overtime, right? Okay, so that will again match the capacity here. And from here, you can calculate the cost, which is pretty straightforward in the same manner what we did for the production scenario, right? Just make sure you're multiplying right values here. So for the permanent worker, we are paying $3,000 per worker. So if I just do one to show you here, so 3,000 for 4,000 workers, right? So that's going to come around 12 million, right? Similarly, if you look at the students, as we're converting 2 half times, right? So we already converted into the full-time equivalent. So we have 500 as full-time equivalent. So from here we know that we are paying a half-time student $1,500, and the full-time equivalent of that student is going to be paid around $3,000, right? So that's kind of 2 students or 2 head counts representing 1 FTE, right? So that's going to be 500 students multiplied by 3,000. So that will give you around 1.5 million, right? And here you will get around again 1.5 million, right? Because these numbers are same here. So here when it comes to the overtime, so for the overtime, we are paying $4,500 to 1 FTE, right? So why this is represented as 2250? Because the overtime can only be done for 4 hours, right? So that goes back to the explanation for option 3 here, right? Okay, so you can use directly here 4,500. You can use here, we have 1,100 workers, and we're paying them $4,500 per FTE, right? And that's going to come across $4.95 million. Similarly, if you use that for December, it will be around $7.2 million. Similarly, you can calculate the hiring costs, right? So always remember that you're hiring the students as well as the other full-time temporary workers. So consider this cost for both of those options, right? So you're hiring around 1,000 full-time workers, which are going to cost us $300. So 1,000 workers, which are costing us $300 to train them, right? So that's around 0.3 million. And at the same time, we have $600 per FTE for the student. So again, just to restate what I said earlier, why are you using 600 here? Because to make one FTE, you're going to have 2 students. They can only work half time, right? So you need to train 2 people to make one FTE. And everything represented here is as full-time equivalent, right? So that's going to be 500. And from here, you got 0.3 million, right? Okay. So now, I mean, from here, you can add up all these. But remember, in December, we will not have any training or hiring costs, right? So from here, you can calculate the total cost. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach me out. Thank you very much.